And welcome into another episode of the Bleav in Mets podcast. Chris Schubert, Jack McKessie back once again. We got sidelined a little bit there. I was under the weather doing some traveling. Jack was doing some traveling. Weren't able to sync up, but we are back. Don't worry. We weren't going to leave you guys high and dry. The good thing about the offseason is we have plenty of time to do all of these related shows. Our infield catchers 40-man roster 2024 season in review episode is what you have in store today. We'll also touch on David Stearns' press conference. Jack, how are you, my friend?
I'm pretty good, Chris. It's good to be back talking about the New York Mets after getting a little bit of time to process the postseason run that was. It's kind of crazy. I think today is a month since the Lindor homer against the Braves in the second to last game of the season.
Crazy.
Which is wild. But yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, we are recording this just for everybody's, if you want to know when we record these episodes, it is the third inning of Game 5 of the World Series as we are recording this. One good thing about making a postseason run is it makes recording schedules very simple. Like when a series is over, you know you have to record, and you know that before the next series, you have to get another episode out. Now with the season over, there's just a lot of ambiguity. So we hope to have another episode for you later on this week as well. So you'll get 2 episodes from us this week. But before we get into the 40-man roster breakdown of the catchers and infielders on this team in 2024, a little season in review, got to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline. Basketball fans, it is that time of year again. The NBA is back. From opening tip-off to buzzer beaters, BetOnline has you covered with the best odds, biggest promotions, and live in-game betting on all of your favorite teams. This season, every game matters. BetOnline has every stat, matchup breakdown, and live odds to bet on during the game. And it's not just the NBA. BetOnline has odds on everything from football, the rest of the MLB playoffs, NHL, to political props. If you're so interested, head to the website today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. Jack, we will get into all of these players and their season in review and the various conversations of whether or not these players should be back if their contract is up. And we have a lot of players like that for 2025. I want to touch on David Stearns' end of season press conference that he gave last week and kind of give the listeners our instant reaction to some of the things that he said. And I think my biggest takeaway is not anything specific or a specific quote or answer that he gave. It's just really nice to listen to a smart baseball guy just very calmly talk about the offseason. Like, he didn't say anything profound. He kind of used GM speak a lot of the time. But it's just nice to feel like the person who's making decisions for your favorite baseball organization is a smart person who just understands how to do his job. Like, it's just calming. It's just a nice relief to hear him go through what the offseason is going to look like. Because I'm like, yeah, like, I trust you. Like, I trust everything you're saying right now.
100%. And it was fun watching him play coy, I guess, with a lot of the media. A lot of questions he was able to deflect with GM speak or kind of give you a little wry smile every once in a while, because he's really, I think, trying to play his cards close to the chest and play into the Steve Cohen quote that he gave when he first took over the Mets, which is, we're going to spend, not necessarily like drunken sailors, we're going to spend wisely. And Stearns knows that going into this offseason. He has a lot of money to work with, but he's not necessarily going to tip his hand quite yet about how he's going to spend it and who he's going to spend it on. So it was definitely nice to just know that going forward, whatever happens in this offseason, even if it's a small move, like picking up a AAA pitcher on a minor league deal, which happened earlier this week.
Oh, yeah, we're already moving. David Stearns, World Series
faith.
Isn't even over. He is wheeling and dealing, baby.
I have so much faith in him going forward, just based off of his one season in charge of baseball ops. So
yeah,
like
Chris Stavinsky, nice. Right? Chris Stavinsky, the move to bring him in on a minor league deal. So already starting to accumulate about 350 arms to try out in spring training to see who's going to make this bullpen. There was one thing that I thought David Stearns said that was pretty funny. He made it unequivocally clear that there is not a single free agent, not a single trade avenue that is out for the New York Mets. Their financial capabilities this offseason put everything on the table. He wasn't specific, but he was very clearly talking about the pursuit of Juan Soto, that there is no financial stranglehold on this team. They can do anything and everything to improve this roster. And it's funny that we go back to the term spending like drunken sailors that Steve mentioned in his opening press conference when he bought the team. They can spend like drunken sailors this offseason and still not hit the luxury tax with the way that everything sets up for them this year. So it's very nice to be in this situation. And some of the decisions that they're going to have to make and some of that money that might get spent could be on players that we're going to talk about here today whose contracts are expiring. And one player in particular who plays first base for the New York Mets is a player to discuss. But there are other players on this list that are either free agents or what their role is on this team next year is unknown. So a lot of conversation to be had here. And look, I think we just have to open this can of worms and start here, right? We have to start with the Pete Alonso conversation. I just think it's the one that's going to, I think, spin us in so many different directions. And you put together our great show prep document, and I won't steal all of your notes here, but the one thing that you said that I think is so important is out of all of the free agents that the Mets are going to have this offseason coming off of this 2024 year, Pete Alonso is the biggest. Maybe not the best player. I would lean maybe towards Sean Manaea in that regard in terms of impact to the 2025 Mets. But in terms of homegrown value, what he means to the fans, what he means to the organization, the longevity that he's been here for, this is the most important decision that David Stearns is going to make in a really long time. And probably his first major decision that he's going to make as Mets general manager, because last year he takes over. He gets to spend money to try to put together a competitive team. This is the decision. This is the moment where he's going to show us what kind of president of baseball ops he's going to be. So I will pass the baton to you, my friend. You can take this Pete Alonso conversation whichever direction you want.
Yeah, so it's really hard to, I guess, come to a conclusion about how I feel about Pete Alonso, because there are so many stats that point towards bringing him back being a wise decision. And there are so many stats and moments, and then there are so many stats and moments that point to bringing him back being a bad decision. And I think I saw a tweet that really put it very well, I thought. Is from Fangraphs senior writer Dan Szymborski. I hope I'm getting that right, but
very easy to confuse him with Dave Dombrowski, which is what I think you were attempting to do.
That's what I was going for.
Yeah, it's tough.
But he tweeted, "I don't envy Mets decision makers this winter. Signing Pete Alonso and not signing Pete Alonso both seem like disastrous things." And I think that really goes into the stats and the raw numbers behind Pete's season this year, ignoring the postseason for right now, versus the impact that he has had on this organization since coming up as a rookie. Because obviously he won Rookie of the Year, set up a National League, or maybe it was an MLB record. He broke Aaron Judge's MLB record for home runs by a rookie. Again, 2019, juice balls, whatever. But he's already, number 3 on the Mets franchise list for career home runs. So this is a guy who is firmly in Mets history as a real contributor and someone that we're going to think back on the early 2020s. And Pete Alonso is a definitive part of those Mets teams. But what worries me is the regression that we've seen from him pretty much every year since his rookie season, that big rookie season with all those home runs. His WAR this year, Fangraphs WAR, was 2.1, which continues a downward trend that has existed since he was a rookie. He was a rookie. He had a 4.7 WAR, 2020. I don't really count that. 3.5 in 2021, 3.8 in 2022, which is, slightly up. And then now to 2.8 last year and 2.1 in 2024. If you watched the Mets this season, you could kind of tell that his contributions, especially offensively, were diminishing. The biggest scenarios in which you could tell that was the case was anytime guys were on base or in scoring position. I think he had the worst year of his career with men on by far. He hit 215 with men on base, which is the lowest it's been ever for him. When he was a rookie, it was 236, which was the second lowest, but 215 is far worse. And he just wasn't able to get runners home a lot of the time with runners in scoring position as well. Batted 232, also a career low. The next worst was 234, but that was in 2020. So I worry about how much he's able to contribute going forward, because the diminishing numbers year over year and the bottoming out, particularly in the regular season, was really, really concerning for me.
I think there are multiple ways that you can slice this, right? I think you can take his 2024 numbers, if we just want to look at what he did this year, and you can twist yourself into the argument to bring him back. You can say, even in a down year, he hit 34 home runs. Even in a down year, he had an OPS plus of 123. Even in a down year, he had a fantastic postseason where he thrived in the most pressure-packed moments for this team, right? You can twist yourself and say those things, those three things that I mentioned are a reason to bring him back. But then you can point to the WAR degrading over time. You can talk to 88 RBIs was a career low for him this year. You can talk to he did not excel with runners in scoring position. He's never going to be the player that he was the first couple of years of his career where he was hitting 260, 270. He's not going to be that player anymore. And so are you going to sign up for a 6-7 year commitment to a player who's going to be 30 years old and pay him while he's going to be a 210 hitter and you hope to hit 50 home runs? Like, that is a weird place to be when you consider the price tag that is going to be attached to it. So I can go both ways on this. I can be convinced of either direction. I will tell you that I keep coming back to this one thing that is grounding me when it comes to this conversation. I want Pete back on the 2025 New York Mets, but it has to be at the right number.
Yeah.
And if the number goes outside of the number that I'm going to present here in the course of this conversation, I'm comfortable with David Stern saying, thanks, but no thanks. What makes a good president of baseball operations is they are able to separate the emotion from the data and good informed decisions. And yes, there is emotion to signing Pete Alonso. And I understand that we want forever Mets. But just because we want forever Mets, just because we want a David Wright, right? Just because we want a Brandon Nimmo, just because we want that, doesn't mean that you have to force it with a player like Pete Alonso. Mark Vientos could be a forever Met. Jet Williams could be a forever Met. Like, there are players on this team that could be forever Mets already. So you can't force this idea of, oh, he's a homegrown guy, we got to pay our homegrown guys. You have other homegrown guys on your team that you pay a lot of money. Like, it doesn't always have to tip the scale in that direction. I understand it being a part of the calculation, but if this organization, if this front office comes to the determination, and I'm just going to pick the player that I would replace Pete with, that we would rather spend the money on a 3 or 4 year deal for Christian Walker than we would on a 6 or 7 year deal for Pete Alonso, if they can come to that conclusion, I'm going to support that conclusion. Yeah. I'm going to understand why they made that determination, because I think Pete, because of who his agent is, and because he played New York, and because in his worst year he hit 34 home runs, we're talking about a situation where they're going to ask for at least 6 seasons, at least. And you're talking about them trying to match some of the other top first basemen in baseball. They're going to try to match Freddie Freeman. They're going to try to match Paul Goldschmidt. They're going to try to match Matt Olson. They're going to try to put themselves in that tier of first baseman. Now, I love Pete. Pete's not any of those guys. Pete's not Freddie Freeman. Pete's not Paul Goldschmidt. Pete's not Matt Olson. He is not any of those guys. Matt Olson does things that Pete doesn't do. Freddie Freeman does things that Pete doesn't do, right? Freddie Freeman hits close to 300, right? Like there are things that those players do that Pete doesn't do. Doesn't mean Pete's not a valuable player. Doesn't mean that Pete doesn't have a role on this team, but it has to come in at a dollar amount. And I can already hear the people, well, Steve Cohen's money, it doesn't matter. It does in the context of, if you're going to pay Pete a certain amount of money, I don't think they're going to go crazy and sign Soto for $50 million. If you're paying Pete 25 to 30, I don't know if Soto's coming in at 50 or 60. I just don't know if that's going to be the case, especially because you got to sign 3 pitchers this offseason.
Right.
We're going to talk about it. They might need a new second baseman this year. Like, there are other things that need to be addressed. And so, yeah, they have about $170 million, if not more, to be able to spend this offseason. But it has to be deployed correctly. And I don't know if they're willing to go above a certain number for Pete Alonso. So, there are a lot of troubling numbers for me. He did not thrive under the pressure of the contract here. In the postseason, all the pressure seemed to be gone for whatever reason, and he seemed to play well.
Right.
But did not thrive in key spots. His high leverage stats were very bad. His runners in scoring position stats were very bad. But if you're telling me that if you told me that over the life of the contract, this is the worst year we would get from Pete Alonso, then I would sign up for it. I just don't know if that's going to be the case, because the other thing about it too, Jack, and I wonder if you've thought about this, the way Pete is as a hitter, the way he's built, doesn't he feel like a guy whose skills deteriorate really quickly? Like, doesn't he feel like a guy who, when that swing goes, it's really going to go and it's going to look not very good?
Yeah. 100%. And I think what worried me so much about this year was, and I guess, over the course of the last, however many, 5 years, it just seems like every pitcher is starting to figure out his weak spots. And I don't think I've seen Pete be able to overcome those challenges, right? I can't count on my hands and feet how many times I watch Pete Alonso swing and miss at a down and out slider. Like, it felt like every at bat for a lot of the early part of the season, because that was what was preventing him from coming through in clutch moments. He would get down in the count and then swing at things that were never in the zone. And the lack of adjustment really hurt him. And I'm worried that going forward, as he gets older and his body starts to deteriorate a little bit, his strength starts to diminish. What are we signing up for if the Mets are giving him a 6, 7, 8 year deal when he's turning 30 in December? After 2 or 3 years, how real of a power hitting threat is he really going to be? And that's what's so concerning to me, especially for, you and I are football guys. We talk about contracts and situations with quarterbacks specifically, and playoff and World Series, or rather championship windows opening for contention. The Mets window is opening for World Series contention. This is a team with future World Series aspirations in the immediate future.
Mm-hmm.
How badly are they willing to hamstring themselves down the line by giving a massive contract to a first baseman who, like you said, could really start to deteriorate as far as his power quickly? Look at what happened to Anthony Rizzo and how his contract with the Yankees is going. I know it was a shorter term deal, and he's an older guy as well, but it's something worth pointing out, and it's something that's concerning for Mets fans and for people hoping that Pete Alonso comes back.
So I'm looking at Fangraphs here on the other screen to just see where Pete was this past year. Amongst first basemen with 400 plate appearances, there were only 36 of them that played in Major League Baseball that got at least 600 plate appearances. Pete Alonso was 5th in WRC plus at 122. So if you wanted to paint the rosy picture of that's the worst year you've gotten from him and he was the 5th best first baseman in all of baseball, that's a legitimate case that you can make, and I can buy into that. But I worry that as he continues to deteriorate, is this when he signs a new contract, let's just say it's a 7-year deal to get him to age 37, right? The peak years of that deal are the next 3 or 4,
if not 2 or 3.
What's the ceiling over the peak of this contract? It's probably that, right? It's probably a 122 WRC plus. Is he going to be a 165 WRC plus like Vladdy Jr. was this year? Is he going to be a 145 WRC plus like Bryce Harper was this year? Like, I just don't see him entering that stratosphere. Whereas I worry that he's going to be, Mets fans, cover your ears when I say this, but he all of a sudden starts falling down to be Rhys Hoskins. And I like Rhys Hoskins as a player. Rhys Hoskins has a nice skill set, but Rhys Hoskins isn't a guy you give $20 to $25 million a year to. Rhys Hoskins is a guy you signed to a nice 2-year, $28 million a year, $28 million contract. You pay him $14 million a year to hit 220 and hit 35 home runs for you, right? So that's where I start to kind of fade into the background. And so, look, I don't think you can have a Pete Alonso conversation without having a Juan Soto conversation. That's just how I personally feel about this. So we'll do this when we get to free agency, but just to close up on Pete, because we have other players to get to and we're almost at 20 minutes here on the pod. If they sign Pete, I think it means Soto's not coming here. And so if you're telling me that it's one or the other, I would rather, it's clear to me that I would rather have Soto than Alonso. And so I just can't get there. I don't see a world where they're going to pay $70 million to Juan Soto and Pete Alonso in 2025. I just don't see that. I don't see that being our reality.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, if you're asking me if I'd rather have a 26-year-old outfielder who is just a bona fide superstar and probably future Hall of Famer, or a aging power hitter first baseman who you might be able to replace already with a guy like Mark Vientos on the roster, I'm taking Juan Soto a million times out of a million. So
the other thing too is that, like, I also like Drew Gilbert. They could probably make a first baseman, right?
Sure.
You like it, that's a potential scenario. You could move Vientos over there, like you mentioned. You could just sign Christian Walker. You could sign there are players out there. Now, when Freddie Freeman signed his deal, 6 years, $162 million, I wanted to look this up. He signed it at age 32. So you're getting Pete. What's Pete? Pete's 30.
Yeah.
So you're getting 2 more peak years out of Pete if you do that. So maybe there's an argument to pay him similarly to what Freeman got, but I can't get there. I cannot get to that type of evaluation.
And for Freeman, it felt like an underpay in the moment.
Right. And the same thing with the Matt Olson contract.
As a reigning MVP, or for Freddie, or I don't know if he was reigning, but as an MVP winner, and then he was, I think, in his first year with the Dodgers, came in second only to our guy Jeff McNeil in the batting title, and was also, a great defensive first baseman, a great power hitting first baseman, and right now he's on a current pending 6 straight World Series game home run streak. So, Pete Alonso is not up to the Freddie Freeman level, and Freddie got 6 years, 162 million. And according to USA Today's Bob Nightingale, Pete's looking for 200 million, which would be higher than
to me.
Any other first baseman by literally $30 million.
Matt Olson better than Pete Alonso. Can we agree there that that's the case?
Yes. And
Matt Olson at age 28 signed a 8-year, $168 million contract. He's getting paid next year in his age 31 season, $22 million. That feels like the peak for what Pete should get. Like, if they sign him for $22 million, I can't be upset about that. But he wants 7 for 200. Like, we're talking close to $30 million. And I just don't know if the Mets will go that far. So this is obviously the thing that was going to take up the most time on the show. And that's why I wanted to start with it, because he's the player that's going to generate the most conversation this offseason. So I'm going to make you pick a side here, Jack. Okay? Pete Alonso, do you want him back in 2025? Yes or no?
At this point in time, no.
And I am the same boat. As we sit here right now with the facts as they currently sit, with what he's asking for, what I think the Mets are going to try to do, I think my answer is no. His asking price comes down. Juan Soto re-signs with the Yankees. I think that changes the equation a little bit, right? I think that changes the calculus for David Stearns and this front office. But as of right now, with the facts as they currently sit, my answer is no. Let's talk about Jeff McNeil, because you mentioned him in your Freddie Freeman dialogue. A guy who played 129 games this year, missed with an injury, was able to return to this team in the NLCS, and he did not have a good year. Had a better second half than he did first half, but this is not hitting champion Jeff McNeil anymore. And I don't know if it's his approach has changed. I don't know if it's the rules have changed with the shift that allowed him to get so many hits that they took that away from him, and he hasn't learned to adjust. He's on this team through at least 2026 with a club option for 2027. That's not something that David Stearns signed up for. It's something that he inherited when he took over this team. And I'll just put my thoughts up front here, Jack. Jeff McNeil feels like somebody that gets traded this offseason to free up second base for Luis Angel Acuna. In my personal opinion, it feels like they trade Jeff McNeil for like some reliever or a starter or something. Not a huge name, but they just clear themselves of the money of Jeff McNeil to open up for Luis Angel Acuna, or I'll say it, I'll be the person who puts it out there, maybe Jet Williams.
Maybe Jet Williams. Maybe Ronnie Mauricio.
Maybe Ronnie Mauricio needs to play second base. I don't know.
The Mets have a lot of options to play middle infield. Obviously, Lindor's got the shortstop spot rounded out. We'll get to him later, I guess. But yeah, when you look at McNeil and the season he had, this is really clearly not what the Mets were hoping would happen when they, signed him to an extension that ate into his arbitration years. He was just straight up bad for like most of the first half of the season. Although one thing I noticed was he seemed to make an adjustment in his approach and his stance and his swing that led to him generating more power. So before he got injured in September, let me jump back. Before June 30th, he was batting .214 and had 5 home runs with a .307 slugging. Slugging is not something we ever really expected from Jeff, but the .214 average is very worrying. But by the time he, was injured in early September, he had boosted his average to .240 with a .384 slugging and 12 home runs. So 7 more home runs in, less than half the time. And to me, what I saw was an adjustment in his swing, particularly. A lot of his hitting early in the season was kind of weird slap hitting, like almost like what you think of with a Japanese contact hitter, kind of running out of the box and swinging the bat as he's doing it and trying to, beat out a ground ball to first base or something like that. And then moving into the second half of the season, it was a lot more staying planted, trying to drive the ball and maybe get some lift on it. So that was promising. I didn't love what I saw in the NLCS. He had like a couple RBIs on sac flies, but I don't know. He maybe had one hit. I really don't see a long-term future even through 2026 over the next 2 years with Jeff. And that makes me feel like I'm on your side. I just think he's a trade piece at this point in time. And you hope that you can package him with someone else and get something nice, but otherwise, take a flyer on a younger prospect, I guess.
I'm not going to put too much on him for what happened in the playoffs. He was coming off of an injury, probably came back sooner than you would expect a player with that injury, but was healthy enough to play and just wanted to provide a spark to his team. So that's too small of a sample size to say to put too much on him, but it's a data point, right? It's something to look towards. But I think you're right. I think the first half of the year, he tried to be the old Jeff McNeil that just tried to like poke the ball into the outfield and just try to put it where the defense wasn't. And he just was missing a lot. He just wasn't himself. And then when he simplified the approach and tried to maybe go for more power, but in the context of lifting the ball more, not necessarily trying to swing for the downs, but just trying to lift the ball more in the air, you saw him have a little bit more success. But here's the context that I think all of the conversations that we're going to have in the offseason are going to be centered around. Can the Mets make an upgrade at blank position? Because the Mets, fairly or unfairly, with what they did in 2024, have set the expectations for 2025 to be they can compete for the division.
Yeah.
Like improve the team, and we're taking on the Phillies, we're taking on the Braves, we're trying to win the division in 2025. Now, if you come up short and make the wild card and make the playoffs, people aren't going to be upset with you, but you've shown an ability that you got through the transition year and made it to the NLCS. Like it's time to see what you're able to do now. And so when I look at the lineup overall, I don't think they can afford Jeff McNeil to be sitting at the end of the year hitting 240. They can't have that many soft spots in the lineup. The lineup needs to have a complete transformation because Starlin Marte, who we'll talk about in the outfield episode, was good in the postseason, but during the year didn't inspire a lot of confidence. Tyrone Taylor, great defense, provided a spark, had some power, but not a guy that you could consistently count on to provide average and provide just guys on the base path to drive in runs. Like the Mets need more length through their lineup. That's what kind of did them in the postseason. Is it if Lindor or Nimmo or Pete or Mark were doing, if it wasn't the top four of the lineup, you were not doing a whole lot. And so the Mets need to get deeper as a team. And I personally think second base is an area that they're going to try to upgrade this season. And it feels like they're going to try to trade Jeff to a team that feels like they have a hole at second base. They feel like they can get more out of him. They can put him in a better situation. And he can play the outfield too. So that versatility is going to be attractive to potential teams. But here's what I will tell you. His contract runs through 2026. I do not expect Jeff McNeil to be the starting to be a member of the starting lineup of the 2026 New York Mets. And I would say it's 60-40 that he is on the starting lineup for the 2025 New York Mets.
And you think 60% that he is
60% that he is, 40% that he isn't. I think he's still the favorite to be the starting second baseman.
I think I'd lean the opposite. I think it's 60-40 that he's not. If only because I think your point that you can't have Jeff McNeil hitting 240 at the end of the season is a really good point, just because when you look at what the Mets have expected from Jeff in years past, it's been being a setup guy, getting on base and or driving in runs when there are runners in scoring position by, getting a base hit when he needs to. And 240 is not going to cut it. I'm glad that he's able to drive the ball, but 12 home runs is not something that the Mets were trying to expect from him in years past. They don't want power necessarily. Power is nice for everyone, but my point is he was a contact guy. And if he's not going to be that guy anymore, I just don't think he fits into the rest of the lineup. That is a spot for an upgrade at second base.
Speaking of second base, we can talk about the person who took over for Jeff McNeil at second base. The biggest story of the season. I hopefully you can see it if you're watching the video version. I have a little Easter egg in my plant over here. My daughter made me a OMG sign that is now hiding in the plant here. They redid my wall behind me. Jose Iglesias. I mean, what can you say about a guy who signed a minor league deal with this team, did not break camp with the team, was down in Syracuse just toiling away, and then they make the decision to call him up, and you wrote the numbers down. You have presented me with the numbers for Jose Iglesias. You made these up. You made up that he had a 137 OPS plus. You made up that he hit 337 with a 381 on base percentage. It is incredible to me that that's the production that they got out of Jose Iglesias. He provided the energy, the OMG. It was just awesome to see. Now, I got to throw cold water on this because I do not expect him to be back on this team in 2025.
Yeah. I mean, what was so great about the Jose Iglesias moment that he had this year pop star ability aside, was that slash line, that 337 batting average, at 381 on base percentage. That's what the Mets were hoping to get from Jeff McNeil.
Right.
That's the kind of player that they wanted at second base in that spot in the lineup to, even after they moved him down, come through in moments where you can get guys on base, come through in moments where there are guys on base and you need to move them over or knock in a run. Jose Iglesias was the player that Jeff McNeil was in that year that he won the batting title and was extraordinarily valuable to the Mets. And it's impossible for me to expect that he will put up anything close to these numbers again. Like, this was a career year for Jose Iglesias. I wouldn't hate to see him back as a depth piece, but there's so many young guys, like I said earlier, who can play in the middle infield that it's hard to envision that there's a spot for Mr. Candelita going into 2025.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think Acuna is going to be on this team as a utility player that can play good defense, and maybe they'll start him in. See, this is the thing. I don't know what the roster is going to look like. So if they miss on some free agents, I can see Acuna being on this team, and we'll get to Acuna in a little bit. But there's also a world where they sign some more major league ready players, and they put Acuna back in AAA and give him maybe half a season there before calling him back up again, right? Because he had that great September, but in the postseason, he didn't look great in the limited bats that he had, and they used him mainly as a defensive replacement. I do think that's encouraging that they felt so strongly of him as a defender that they put him in as a rookie in playoff games to protect leads. Like, that felt like they trusted him. But I do think they will potentially look for an upgrade, and maybe that includes Jose Iglesias. Maybe Iglesias loved being in New York so much that he comes back on a friendlier deal than I think he's going to get from some team this offseason, and you have him as not your starting second baseman like he was this year, but as your utility defensive replacement late in games. That's value to have because he can play short, he can play third, he can play second. Like that, he takes up one major roster spot on your bench if you were able to bring him in.
Yeah, absolutely. And if nothing else, regardless of what happens with Jose Iglesias, I'm going to root for him for the rest of his career.
I thought, it depends. If he signs with a rival, it's going to be tough, but I will certainly.
I felt the same about Luis Guillorme, and he ended up with the Braves and then the Angels and then blah, blah,
blah. This is going to be the shortest conversation that we're going to have on the show. Francisco Lindor is our MVP. He is our shortstop. He is awesome. He had an awesome year. He should have been a Gold Glove finalist, as you rightly mentioned in the notes, and he was robbed of that. He had a 138 OPS plus, a 137 WRC plus. He hit 273. His WAR was 7 from Baseball Reference, was a 7.8 from Fangraphs. He probably should be the MVP, but he won't because Ohtani went 50-50. Single-handedly helped this team get to where they got in the postseason. Big moment after big moment. He thrived. He handled the media well. He handled the city well. He is our captain. He is our leader. You can add whatever you would like to, Jack, but that's the conversation about Francisco Lindor. He had an awesome season. He's an awesome player. I'm glad to have him on my team as our shortstop.
I have nothing to add. I cannot wait to watch Francisco Lindor play baseball for my favorite baseball team again in 2025.
That was a very 10 out of 10 no notes needed response to what I said. I mean, because again, we could go check. He's awesome. He's great. Like, he's the starting shortstop for this team for a long time. He is going to go down as one of the greatest Mets of all time. I fully believe that. You want a hot take? I'll give you a hot take right now. He is going to go down, and he might already be, in my mind, the best shortstop in Mets history. He will replace Jose Reyes. He will replace Jose Reyes if 100%. He hasn't already for a lot of people. So that's how good Francisco Lindor is, and I think we're going to continue to see that. All right, we'll start with the third baseman, and we're going to go in chronological order. Let's start with the guy who was the starting third baseman for the New York Mets, and that was Brett Baty, who was optioned on May 31st by this team, played in one more game after that, and this was his stat line in that little run that he had before Mark Vientos came up and took over. 229, 306, 327 slash line, an 82 OPS plus, and 4 home runs. This guy crushes the ball in the minor leagues. Absolutely crushes it in whatever minor league level that you put him at. He gets to the big leagues, and he just does not have the same result. Is he a quad A player? Is he just somebody who his skill set does not translate to the major league level, but it does at the minor league level? I don't know. But Brett Baty was given the opportunity to have the third base job. He did not succeed in it. It was given to somebody else. The third base job is no longer, we're not accepting applications. We have hired somebody for the position. Brett Baty, your application has been denied. We are not accepting it.
Yeah. I don't really know what to say about Brett Baty. It's so weird watching all of the highlights from him in Syracuse. Like, I guess happy for him. And it just looks like a completely different player when he's down in the minors. Like, he's able to lift the ball. He's able to generate power to his pull side. Like, he's a guy that might be a quad A player. I just remember watching him when he was on the Mets early in the season, and like, lifting the ball was his biggest issue. He was constantly hitting the ball on the ground. He was constantly, getting lucky early, and it just faded fast. I think at one point earlier in the year, he was hitting like over 300, but it obviously quickly diminished to that 229 number. And if he can't lift the ball, if he can't be a power guy, if he can't figure out a spot of versatility in maybe left field or somewhere else in the outfield, first base, I just don't see how he fits in on this team at all going forward, because of the guy we're going to talk about next. But is this a guy that maybe, Chris, you try to package in some kind of trade deal and hope that a team likes what they've seen in him in AAA?
And the New York Mets now get to do this because I trust their front office. This feels like one of those players that they take and they swap with another team's like failed prospect or failed like player that hasn't reached the heights, but they think they can fix. Like, this feels like they trade for somebody's like starting pitching prospect that hasn't really panned out. And they're like, now we're going to make you throw more sinkers and you're going to do this to your fastball. And then all of a sudden they're going to be amazing. Like, the Mets feel like they can do that now. And that feels like what they're going to do, where they're going to just flip Brett Beatty, and it's going to be failed prospect for failed prospect. We'll just swap and see if we can figure out each other's problems and just move on. Like, that's how this ends for Brett Beatty. Because the problem, Jack, is when he's not pulling the ball and he's not getting lift, the swing is so long. It's just, he's so out of sync, and he can't catch up to anything. He's flailing at just off speed stuff, and he's behind on fastballs. And so it's just, the swing looks so long. And when he's quick and compact and he has that drive and he's able to lift the ball, it looks so good. It looks like a major league hitter that can hit 20 doubles. Like, it looks like somebody who can be extremely successful. But when he goes through lulls, where it's just not working for him. And unfortunately, so far in the big leagues, there's been a lot of lulls. The swing is so long. And unfortunately, or at least, unfortunately for Brett Beatty, fortunate for us, fortunate for the New York Mets, we've got a third baseman. Again, I'm not accepting any more applications because Mark Vientos, I'll say it. You said might be in our notes here. I'm going to say it. He's a star. Mark Vientos is a star. He came up and hit 27 home runs in the regular season, hit 266. Was one of the best third basemen in all of the National League from the moment that he was called up, if not the best. And then what did he do in the postseason? Oh, he just followed that up being by the number 2 hitter in a lineup trying to go to the NLCS and hit 327 with 5 home runs and 14 RBIs. Mark Vientos is our third baseman. We use that term a lot when we're behind them. Our ace, Sean Manaea, our shortstop, Francisco Lindor. I'm willing to say it. Our third baseman, Mark Vientos.
This is something that we talked about immediately after the Mets were eliminated. The Mets have the left side of their infield completely figured out.
Long time. Forever.
I am declaring it right now. Mark Vientos and Francisco Lindor are going to be among the best left sides of the infield in baseball in 2025. And
I would make the case that you could pencil them in the top 2 spots of the lineup for opening day of 2025.
100%.
You may want to put Nimmo at 2 and put Vientos at 3 and maybe flip-flop that if you wanted to, but those 2 guys are going to be batting in the first inning of every game for a really long time for the New York Mets. Like, it's that simple. He is a stud. He is a star. And you know what? The best part about it is his defense was serviceable, if not kind of average. Like, he's never going to wow you. He's never going to win a Gold Glove. But I think he's only going to get better. I think we have to remember, he's still like 24 years old.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane. He's 24 years old. Like, there's a lot of time for him to continue to develop. And I've seen a lot of people who follow the Mets and are in prospect world, right? They follow these prospects, and they didn't think Mark Vientos could make the necessary adjustments to be a big-time player at the major league level. Jarrett Seidler, who covers prospects for, I believe it's Baseball Prospectus, but it's also a huge Mets fan. He admitted, he goes, I didn't think Vientos could make these adjustments. But sometimes when we're scouting and we do player development, it's hard for us to factor in just how much a player wants it and how much a player is just able to make these changes at a certain age. You can't quantify that. And you have to give credit to Mark Vientos because he has put in the work and he is now a star. He is one of the best third basemen in the National League. And like you said, the New York Mets have the left side of their infield set. And that's a nice place to be if you're David Stearns. I know I'm going to get 25 plus home runs. I mean, he had 27 home runs and didn't play the first 2 months of the year.
Yeah.
So that's your third baseman. And I don't worry about a sophomore slump. The dude went into the postseason and just continued to crush the ball, like thrived under the pressure. So 25 plus home runs from my third baseman, 25 plus home runs from my shortstop. I have 50 home runs on the left side of my infield, and I haven't even discussed bringing in Juan Soto or brought back Pete Alonso.
Yeah, Mark Vientos came up and like you could just tell he wanted that job so bad. Like he took it as a slight that he wasn't on the opening day roster. And he and Brett Beatty are friends, but he wanted to steal that job really, really bad, and he absolutely just balled out the entire season. And the postseason run that he had will go down like along the lines of the Daniel Murphy run in 2015. I mean, the grand slam against the Dodgers in Game 2 after the intentional walk to Lindor is just like an unbelievable moment in Mets postseason history.
I was already in on Mark Vientos. That was the moment that solidified it for me. I mean, this dude, they walked Francisco Lindor to face him, and he legitimately
with 2 outs.
He legitimately said after the game that when they did that, it ticked him off. Like he was mad that they did that. And you've seen it. People have found the video from the game where they walk him and they show Mark Vientos, and he kind of side eyes him like, okay, this is what you want to do. To me, when you have that type of edge about you, you're a superstar. And then you come through in the moment. Like that is insane.
Yeah, I'm all the way in on Mark Vientos.
Now, Jack, I'm going to do something I'm not supposed to do, right? Because we're doing a live podcast and I don't know when we're going to post this. You are locked into what we were doing here. I am keeping tabs on the baseball game. Okay. I am about to tell you something that you are going to be shocked by. The game is now 5-5. The Dodgers have tied it up with a 5-run fifth inning with 2 outs. They scored all their runs with 2 outs. It is now 5-5. I just wanted to get your live reaction to that as we were doing the pod.
What?
So it is 5-5, and they've scored all 5 runs off of Garrett Cole with 2 outs in the top of the 5th.
Did Freddie hit another home run?
No, Freddie didn't. Freddie did not hit a home run. He hit a single to score 2 runs, and then Teoscar just doubled to tie the game up. But it is now 5-5.
I think Freddie is now tied for the World Series record in RBIs with those 2. I think he's 2 away.
I don't know if the New York Yankees can get up from Garrett Cole being on the mound with a 5-0 lead and blowing it and losing the World Series at home. I don't know how you can get up from that. I don't know how you do. We have more players to get into, though. We cannot sidebar too strongly. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more players to get into. We're already at 45 minutes. There's not a lot to say about this next player, I don't think. But let's talk about Luis Angel Acuna, because he came up in what was an impossible spot. He was replacing the MVP of the league at that point. Like, I legitimately think if Francisco Lindor continued to play and went on the tear that he was on, we would be having a legitimate conversation about whether or not he could be MVP. So he came up in an impossible spot and just played really well. Like, it was exciting to see him play that well and show a little bit of the power that his brother has, which we don't think he's going to have like his brother does, but showed the skill set that the Mets love about him. He plays good defense. He's speedy. He has a little bit of pop. He's going to be able to put the ball into the gap and have some triples because of his speed. He's just a nice player. He's not his brother. I told you what my comparison to him is. He was going to be a better version of Jeff McNeil. He was going to give you better defense, and you were going to get exactly what you expected to out of Jeff McNeil. And so if the Mets get that, there's your Jeff McNeil replacement that we were talking about earlier in the show. I just don't know if David Stearns, going into 2025, wants Luis Angel Acuna as one of his starting 9 or on his bench. I just think they would rather have somebody more established to be there. And so I think Acuna starts back in Syracuse, but I don't think we could tell the story of the 2024 New York Mets without discussing what Luis Angel Acuna did for those 2 weeks in September.
It was actually unbelievable to watch when Acuna came up, especially with the context of, we did our preview for, I want to say it was the Philly series, and there were the talks that he was going to come up, and you immediately prefaced and said, do not expect him to be Ronald Acuna the second.
Yeah. And then he hit 3 home runs in his first 3 games. And I was like, great.
Yeah. And like, not just the 3 home runs and the triple and the couple of doubles, like he was coming through in big moments. Like he was coming through in the clutch and putting the Mets ahead or extending leads with safety runs, or I'm totally blanking on the word.
Insurance runs.
Insurance runs. Thank you.
Yes, I got you. Don't worry, buddy.
But like you said, this is not the 2024 Mets story can't be told without mentioning Luis Angel Acuna, who, by the way, according to Baseball Reference, was worth half a win above replacement in 14 games. According to Fangraphs, was worth 0.7 wins above replacement. Like, that's absurd. And I'm not going to expect him to be, like you said, the next Ronald Acuna. I'm not expecting him to be a big power guy. But if he can come up next season and be and have similar, maybe not to the batting average extent, numbers as Jose Iglesias, I would be over the moon to see that and to know that Luis Angel Acuna can be the Mets starting second baseman for years to come and shore up another spot in the Mets infield.
Yeah, there's no reason why he can't be what Jose Iglesias was for this team. Maybe not hitting 337, but to be a just productive baseball hitter. Like not going to be a 25 home run, 40 home run power guy, not going to be a 330 hitter, not going to be just a guy that's just a professional hitter, just knows the situation and knows what to do. Now he's a free swinger, so you do have to worry about that. The pitch selection isn't there yet, and I don't know if it will ever be there, but I do think he can be a decent MLB player, and I think we'll see him at some point during 2025. And it's nice because if you do have any underperformance, he's shown that he's been able to handle it, so you could immediately bring him up if you needed to. 3 players left. Ronnie Mauricio. To me, Jack, the story here is that David Stearns talked about how they just have to get him to doing baseball activities. And so my word of caution for everybody is I would not, if you got your notebook out and you're trying to pencil in the starting 26-man roster for the New York Mets, I would not be putting Ronnie Mauricio down on that list. I think we are a ways away from that.
Yeah, unfortunately, it looks like his ACL recovery is a bit lengthier than he or the Mets have expected. Hoping for the best for him. He showed a lot of great pop when he came up in 2023, but I don't know what to expect from him in 2025, or if I should be expecting him at all. But hoping for the best for him. He's kind of only on this list because he's on the 40-man roster, but I would not expect to see him on the 26-man come opening day.
All right, we got 2 catchers to talk about. Let's start with Francisco Alvarez. Only hit the 11 home runs. Was injured, missed some time with the thumb injury that kept him sidelined. Played better down the stretch. Struggled in the postseason, but I think ended the postseason on a good note. And I think my takeaway here is Francisco Alvarez is going to be fine. He is still he's 22 years old. Like, it's rare to see a player that young at that position play like at the big league level. And so I just think we need to be a little bit more patient. There's nobody that works harder than Francisco Alvarez on the New York Mets. Like, he works extremely hard to get better. And so it was a disappointing year, but if there is a silver lining from it, he's going to learn from these struggles. Like, he's going to learn from how opposing teams chose to pitch him for a lot of time this year. And I think he's going to make those adjustments in his swing. And I'll make this one of my early predictions for 2025. I expect a big year from him. I expect us to get to a place where he might not start the year here. I expect us by around the All-Star break, there's your number 5 hitter. He is just in the lineup as your number 5 hitter, and you are getting everything you want out of Francisco Alvarez.
The thing about Francisco Alvarez is, and you kind of alluded to this, he's a player that just plays like he has a chip on his shoulder, even if he doesn't. Like, he was the number 2 prospect in baseball, I want to say, like the top prospect for the Mets at one point before he came up, and he played like he was, fighting for a roster spot when he was a rookie. And as if you needed any more reason to believe that Alvarez will be back and better in 2025, look at how he played in the postseason. Like, he has a legitimate chip on his shoulder now. He has legitimate things to improve on. He left a lot of runners on base in that NLCS, and no one is going to be harder on Francisco Alvarez than Francisco Alvarez is going to be on himself. And I just fully expect that he's going to take all offseason to, patch up any holes in his game. So I'm with you. I think come 2025, he'll be a middle of the lineup bat that the Mets are going to be able to rely on, as with some other guys on this list, hopefully for a very long time.
Last player for us to discuss as we do our season in review episode, Luis Torrens, who was acquired by this team in the middle of the year to be their backup catcher because they needed somebody that could provide defense. And he started hot, had that stretch of games. I believe it was against the Nationals where he just couldn't make an out for like 2 days. He was just doing everything. But he was the defensive replacement for this team. Like, he was their defensive-minded catcher who did a great job throwing out base runners, better than he was in his career. Didn't provide a ton with the bat outside of that early stretch, but really kind of calmed the tide for the team at a time where their defense, at least from that position, was pretty suspect. And I don't know if Luis Torrens is going to be on this team in 2025, but the point that I want to make is the New York Mets need to have their backup catcher be somebody who is a defensive wizard. Like, they need to I'll give you an example. They need Austin Hedges on this team. Like, I don't care if Austin Hedges hits 112. Austin Hedges needs to be there because he plays good defense. Like, they need a defensive-minded catcher. This year showed how important that role is for this team. And if you get the offense that I think you're going to get from Alvarez in 2025, having a roster spot for a defensive catcher wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know if it's necessarily Torrens, but having a backup catcher is really important. I think in a way, he was so crucial to the turnaround of this team. You look back to the full picture of the season, and in hindsight, that London game that he won with the double play, that 2-3 double play on the dribbler, where he faded back onto home plate and then threw it to first base as he was falling down, was the start of the turnaround of the season.
Yep.
So, I'm always going to appreciate him for that. I'm always going to appreciate his ability to throw out runners on the base paths. But if the Mets can get that from another guy, I feel like they will. It doesn't necessarily have to be Luis Torrens.
We set a record. This is our longest episode to date. I'm not surprised that it was. A lot of conversation to be had. We kind of teased this during the postseason, that once we got to the offseason, there were so many layers and so many things to unpack from this team. So we will be back later this week. This episode, you'll probably be listening to this Thursday in your podcast feeds. So we'll come back with an episode over the weekend, probably on Saturday, that will be discussing the outfielders, and we'll start getting into the pitching. Probably just get through the starting pitchers, and then we'll do the bullpen and get into the rest of the team in season in review for 2024 over the next couple of episodes. Don't worry, I have already started the list of potential free agents. I've already sent Jack 4 names that he's looked up. Like, I'm sending Jack obscure relievers that I think David Stern is going to be all over. Like, the work is being done for us for the offseason of 2025. So don't you worry. We are doing the work. The work is being done. Please do us a favor, rate, review the podcast, whether you're listening on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review. We would greatly do appreciate it. That helps us grow this community here and helps us continue to get the word out about this podcast. So we will be back over the weekend with the next season in review episode as we go through the Mets in 2024. But appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.